Hello. Patricia, are you going to be the host or the co-host? How do you guys work it on your committee?
I'm the co-host. Mar will be the host.
Okay.
I'm looking to see if our speaker is here.
Mara, 37 folks had signed up for the meeting, just FYI.
Thank you.
And in a few minutes, I'll make you the host.
Okay. We'll give folks a few more minutes to, oh, well, it's not even 6:30 yet. Do you see Katie, Bob?
I do see her.
Oh, there she is. She's here.
Here, I'm here, I'm here. Can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, I'm here.
Will you please elevate Mr. Ware?
Okay.
KW?
Yep.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Let me get my orientation together with my, there we go.
All right.
Mara, I'll make you the host now.
Thank you. Okay. I think we can get started. Sorry. You just, Patricia, can you elevate? I'll co-host you. Oh, you are a co-host. Can you elevate Katie's phone, please? All right. Well, hello. Welcome to the February 2022 Equity, Race, and Justice Committee meeting for Community Board 2. My name is Mara Fitzgerald. I am the chair of the committee. I am joined by Patricia Laria, who is the Vice Chair of the Equity, Race, and Justice Committee. I see our Board Chair of Community Board 2, Janine Kiley, is here. Sorry, Susan, Board Members Susan Kent, Brian Pape, Eugene Yu, Ritu Chatri, Susan Gammy, Dr. Shirley Smith, and Carter Booth. Committee members are in attendance are Anthony Wong, Amy Brenna, Matthew Metzger, Katie Bordenaro. Is that everybody? Yes. And of course, our wonderful district manager, Bob Gormley. Thank you all for being here tonight. Patricia, would you like to do the norms?
Sure. Hi, hello, everybody. Welcome. I will just go over the norms. Please be kind and courteous. Please use I versus you statements. Be brief and concise. All questions on this topic will be heard and considered subject to time, honor diversity and knowledge, and varied experiences, needs, and values. Do we want them to submit questions in Q&A, Mar?
I think that would be ideal.
Okay, please submit questions in Q&A on the bottom of the Zoom screen. Thank you. And that's it. Back over to you.
Wonderful. So we are blessed this evening. Oh, first, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded lands, historical lands of the Lenape people and the vibrant communities that were known as Land of the Blacks and Little Africa. We are joined tonight by historian and founder of Black Gotham Experience, Kamau Ware, who will take us on a wonderful journey through the vibrant, rich history of the Black diaspora, or the first Black community here in New York, if not the United States. So, Mr. Ware, if you would please.
Hello, just wanted to check my volume. Is my voice coming across clear? I'm getting a thumbs up. Awesome, fantastic. I want to thank Mar and Patricia for continuing to be in dialogue and hospitable to the Black Gotham Experience on this community board. For people on the community board I've had a chance to know through the virtual space or in real life, I want to thank you for continuing to show up and be inquisitive, and also just allies in pushing stories forward that make our city greater. And I have some updates and I have some information, and we have some time for correspondence. And I'm going to share my screen and present some slides, but also I have one of my colleagues is in the room, Justine Gonzalez. So from time to time, she might be able to answer a question while I'm going through the presentation, as well as be able to drop some different links that might relate to the content that I'm sharing. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and prepare to share my screen with you all. All right, so next question. Are my pixels okay? Can everybody see the screen? Fantastic. So I really have some updates first. Presented in October 2020. Amazing to think that was almost 2 years ago, soon to be 2 years ago. And I want to just share some of the things that we've been looking at since initially presenting the idea that it's worth commemorating and memorializing some of these lands, all these lands, and understand the historical richness that there is in going to the 1600s and acknowledging places where Black people were able to hold space as a community, as former enslaved people, as farmers, as families, and how that's in dialogue with so many important parts of the story of New York and our country as well. And so I want to give some updates, and just for people who are seeing this for the first time, this is an image of who we have deemed Catalina. We've created this artifact in a more contemporary setting. one of the main reasons why Black Gotham Experience is in front of you today is because we have done walking tours around Lower Manhattan to help people understand the Black diaspora's impact on New York, which is missing from the public square primarily. You can walk down streets that Black people have paved or lived on and have no notion of that because it's not marked. But it's also part of the collective consciousness as well, where you might watch movies and TV but not see these particular stories made manifest. And so what we're looking at doing is in addition to the walks that we give, begin to create the artifacts and the visual material that's not in the repositories around the world to help show the diversity of history, but also show the impact of the African diaspora. And so just as an origin story, this is like not my 12-year challenge photo, but I was inspired in 2008 to create Black Gotham Experience. I like to start with this picture, not because I look, younger and smaller per se, but I think it's always worth noting that there was no business plan or strategic plan, but there was a middle school student who challenged me while I was giving a series of stories about European immigrants in the Lower East Side coming to New York, working hard, struggling financially, but finding a way to put their kids through college and survive economic hardships. And I still believe those are very important stories to tell. But at the end of a 90-minute conversation, this one young Black girl from Brooklyn asked her only question the entire 90 minutes, which was, where were the Black people? Which was not only a geographic conversation, but more of an energetic conversation. Like, where is the energy of Black people in the story of New York? Not just where we located, but where were Black people in the origins of New York? One thing people often go to is the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s, but have no knowledge that like 300 years prior to that, there were people of African descent here in New York. And so part of what we're looking at doing as an artist organization, but also a scholarly one, is just making things more visual, creating more experiences. And here on this map that can be found on archive.org or on Stokes' iconography of Manhattan, you see different ways that land has transferred from the time period of the Dutch to the British to our republic, as stated by Mar earlier, is these are unceded lands. But what we have are these maps that still give us some layers into that history. And so what you saw earlier was an image that showed Catalina Anthony as a landowner circa 1643, and below her you see Domingo Anthony. This is right off the Bowery. And so the Bowery was in part paved with enslaved labor, but also generations later you had people who became farmers and landowners on these grounds. And also you have people like Bastian, Anthony Congo, here's the name D'Angola. They live right next to other European landowners during this time period, but this is the first time we really have like a self-emancipated Black community in North America. And for that reason alone, these locations are very historically relevant. And so this is the map I just showed you, but it's kind of been carved out as a vector. And by doing that, we're able to put them in different locations and find ways to convey these stories. Another way we use design is, of course, photographing people who we ask to step in and be historic figures. Similar to what has happened for many histories, is like centuries later, decades later, people go back and retell those stories artistically, and they might seem old to us now because they might have been made in the 1800s, but often those same stories are being told from the 1700s. And so considering the level of terrorism and duress that people of African descent have been through in this hemisphere, it doesn't feel like we're late in telling these stories in many respects. It feels like we're right on time to begin to add the Black perspective in the conversation of the diaspora of Black people in this world, but in particularly showing our point of view and showing the humanity of Black people. And one way we're looking at doing that is through a graphic novel project, but also public circle projects where we can impact visible space. And last time we talked, I wanted to just go back to this slide. We showed a number of different flags just as a case study of how we use these as markers to have conversations about where Black people would have been. And so I just want to draw your attention to this one flag here in the middle, which represents Domingo and Catalina becoming landowners in 1643. In this regard, the 6 and the 4 is Catalina and 1 is Domingo. They both became landowners the same year. They were right on top of each other off of Bowery. They both became landowners July 13, 1643, and this is a graphic that we use to put on a flag to tell that story. Here's another way we chose to use it. We did a project with the Village Trip. Some of you may know about that because it's right here in your district, but we use the flag as a way to mark the location of the walking tour while moving through the village to talk about the land of the Blacks and where it was located. We also did a project with Van Cortlandt Park where I took a photograph of two people who played Hester and Piero, two folks that were enslaved to the Van Cortlandt family that also have a street in Lower Manhattan named after them. And we took this image representing Hester and Piero and also put that onto a flag that is now flying at the Van Cortlandt Historic Home in the park. And this was actually unveiled on Juneteenth last summer as part of the consecration of the grounds of a new African burial ground that's established in the Bronx. And here you see the name Hester and Piero Mill Pond. And so it's something that we've been continuing to look at as a way to engage the public in showing the flags as a way to mark these various locations. We even did a project where we use flags more artistically to demark locations for a gallery experience here in the Seaport. And so it's something that we've continued to use, and every time it's a new case study and it bears fruit as a great, simple way to engage the community and show people something aesthetic, but also the story behind it. And one of the things that happened after we got the resolution from your community board, CB2, is we had a conversation with our friends over at the Oculus at the World Trade Center. And they were very excited about that prospect and were like, we want to be a part of the story as well. And so they created the largest display of the land of the Blacks by using their like football field size screens and all the various screens all over the Oculus as a way to celebrate the land of the Blacks. And as you can see in the graphics, we're taking some of these map locations, like where Manuel Groot lived, where Anthony Congo lived. Further down here, you can see where Catalina lived, and we're using those maps as graphics, as artwork to engage people publicly and talk about what this history means. And also, I think it's worth noting that, once again, with support from your esteemed community board members, Mar and Patricia, we were able to get 2 proclamations signed and proclaimed last July to acknowledge that July 13th is an important day for people to understand different moments in Black history, but also to pause for a moment and have a vision for the future. Because there's always going to be something that we don't know, but how do we begin to create context and create culture that moves us past the ignorance of what we don't know and creates culture for the next day. And so before I go any further, I just want to pause for a second and, you know, not quite a round of applause, but just a thank you that the momentum that came out of the resolution from this community board in 2020 has been part of why we've been able to move forward and get other projects off the ground, like Black Vision Day, like the Oculus exhibition. And we haven't made this announcement publicly yet. This will be our first public announcement. It's not a press release yet, but we also were able to receive a grant from the Mellon Foundation to help us continue this work. And one of the things that they were interested in is seeing how we work with private businesses, we work with schools, we work with agencies of city, and also with community boards in order to create spaces that doesn't cost the community anything other than being outside to find out what it's about. And I think I see Dr. Smith with her hand up. Either her hand is up or she's giving a shout out.
Yes, I've given a shout out to Mar, to Pat, and to Carter Booth, who was chair when this committee was founded. Long time coming. I'm extremely proud of it and the work that has been done so far. And I'm looking forward to all the great work that's going to happen as we move forward as a community board and a city, actually, too. Thank you.
You are very welcome, and thank you. And yes, thank you as well, Dr. Smith. And once again, you know, Mar and Patricia, thank you for your leadership and for your passion and commitment to working with us and keeping it going forward. So a few more announcements. This is December 1st, 2021. I didn't even know this happened when it did, but our archivist and researcher came across it, who is a PhD candidate at NYU. And he found this article written by Morgan Caramello, who's like, NYU should create a monument for the land of the blacks. And I was talking to one of my advisors, and she was like, oh, she was one of my students who came on your walking tour, and since then has been talking about why NYU needs to get behind this effort to commemorate the fact that there was a black land ownership on NYU's campus. And we also had an intern last semester who is working on a map that shows you all the different locations on NYU's campus that were once black farms. And also another one of my advisors, Mr. Michael Dinwiddie, who has this transformation exhibition happening right now on NYU's campus, included the Land of the Blacks in the presentation that they're doing, which is a talk, it's an exhibition, it's some theater. And so once again, I just want to show that there is momentum and there's connections of like 1 degree of separation or no degree, because they're either parts of the Black Gotham Experience Advisory Team or people that are in their class and have been on our walking tours. So with that said, let me actually pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions, comments? I thank you, Dr. Shirley, for making your statement, Dr. Smith. But I wanted to pause and see if anybody else had anything they wanted to share before we continue. I see big ups to the committee. Yes, for sure. All right, double checking. All right, cool. I'm gonna just go ahead and keep moving. So we do a number of talks, a lot of them in February, but not only. And one thing that we have done in presenting any conversation about history is creating a baseline. And this goes for 4th graders, this goes for people who are out of school. And we look at that history is not exclusively what happened, nor what is said to have happened, but a complex context to control the creative process of truth making. You can't quite ascertain truth without having certain facts. And if certain facts are not on the table, then you're not able to incorporate them into your decision making or your vision for what's real and what's not. And the last sentence, just, history is what is happening, more than a recollection of the past, which is always present. And I probably don't have to give too many examples about history repeating itself, other than looking at the state of our country and our discourse around voter suppression, around rights, around what's okay to talk about in school, about the banning of books, to show you that it's not necessarily history repeating itself, but it's people who are afraid that history gets out of their control and brings in new perspectives. And I think that's something that we need to have in mind when we consider what we're discussing with marking these territories. By marking these lands, by putting these flags in place and syncing them to technology so people can access the information in the cloud and bring it into the classroom, we're just giving people more information to consider what's real and consider where they're walking and consider what's important. History is not something that is just in the past, in a shoebox. We're all historical actors. And so we need to give people more context and share more stories so that we're able to be evolving and not going backwards and not staying in the same place century after century. So I thought, oh, here we go. So time period, we're looking at multiple layers of history here on this island in Manhattan. And we often talk about New York was once New Amsterdam, which is true. But I want to just state that a lot of the public works that happened during the time period of 1624 to 1664 are created with enslaved labor. And these enslaved laborers are coming from different parts of the continent or off the continent of Africa, who are able to understand that they're not owned by individuals, because initially the Calvinist Dutch belligerents against the Spanish Empire thought that they were morally above the Iberian Catholics because they were not enslaving people and also were not committing genocide, and that was a point of pride for them. And so when African people were being brought here through piracy, they were very specific about not enslaving them directly. They did enslave them indirectly by making them company slaves, but those company slaves were able to form the first union in North America and petition for wages, and also petition for the rights to do things like get married in their churches, baptize their children, and also become landowners. It did take some time, but in part, that's because we know these lands were not ceded by the Lenape. So the American indigenous people that were here were working with the Dutch in trapping beaver skins. They did not sell the island for trinkets worth $26. That's mythology in many respects. There was an exchange of goods, but the people that were indigenous did not leave the territories immediately or shortly after. They continued to actually be in commerce with the Dutch, doing things like trapping beavers so they could make those very fancy beaver hats you find in all the Rembrandt paintings in the Dutch Master series. And so this is a complex scenario where you have indigenous peoples of the Americas having a business partnership, but then also having conflict as the Dutch are taking more territories from them. And then Black people are kind of stuck in the middle trying to figure out what does it mean for us. And so Black people have been on this island before there was conflicts between the Europeans and the American indigenous. And part of what they were able to do during that conflict was acquire some land during the broader conflict. And it's a history that gives us a chance to also think about and acknowledge the Lenape as well, because that's a very important part of the narrative. You're not going to really have Black land ownership on this island without there being some conflict already between the Dutch and the Lenape. And so part of what I think is valuable about marking these lands as well is that you bring in a very large portal to discuss more stories, even though you're talking about African farmers. You're also talking about these Black farmers who were in the middle of a conflict, which brings us back to also finding ways to acknowledge the Lenape as well. And it's also worth keeping in mind that, I know I already stated it, but the positionality of Black people on the island during this time period was not one of being subhuman. There was a conflict happening in Europe, which spread out through the ocean, and Black people who were being pirated and brought to this island were not being brought here as subhuman beings. They're being brought here as people who were pirated from another nation that was involved in the slave trade. And so Black people had a certain status in this time period that begins to become more difficult to maintain over time. But that window in history is such a rich opportunity for us to begin to understand that the seeds and the origins and the first, major episodes of the transatlantic slave trade have a very real connection to Manhattan with these African landowners. And so this is a global story. I like history, period, as I told you. 2008, I'm talking about Irish people, German Jewish people, and I knew more about European history in New York before I knew about all this Black history. Part of why I'm really excited about it is because whether you're talking about European history, Black folks can hear it, or it's Black history, all kind of other folks want to hear it too. It's just like we're all human beings and we're all connected. And as you see that it's a global affair that's happening, that's making these different moments take place, it shows the connectivity that we all have, but it just gives you different insights that we can also engage in that can make our public square more interesting. And this is another way of looking at the time period as well, is you have people here. This is clearly a woman of color based upon her features, her mouth, her nose, her hair, not quite as the same complexion as people out here who are enslaved. But here you have this guy who's in dialogue with her. It seems to me like she is rebuffing his request, but you have this interesting moment where you see Black rights being scaled back as the Dutch go from primarily waging a war against the Iberians over 80 years to beginning to become more involved in the slave trade themselves. But part of what's happening during this window, once again, is you have people like Catalina Anthony becoming a landowner, and then that creates new opportunities or new conversations. This right here is Washington Square Park, and I just wanted to point out that part of what you have is Washington Square Park is here. Here's Anthony Portuguese land, but we're looking at beginning to utilize design to pull those various elements out and pull that map out and have a conversation, and then use that, whether it be in some digital artwork or some other kind of medium, to have deeper discussions about those spaces. And so what I want to do right now is just show you how part of what's happening with our current research is digging into these archives and looking at these land grants because one question people always have is, what happened to the land? Where did it go and when did it move? And what we're seeing is that after New York City becomes New York City in 1664, that people hold on to the land for sometimes 10 years, sometimes 30 years, some people even until like 1720, 1721. And part of what you have is Stuyvesant, who was a person who lost the territories. He actually goes back to the Netherlands in a slave ship called the Gideon that arrived the same day as the English. He decides to come back and become a New Yorker and die a New Yorker, and he's buried right here in New York, which I understand is a whole other conversation. But when he does come back, he does pretty much state that the black people who had land earned it, and it should be unmolested. I think that's the exact word he uses, molested. Like, leave those lands alone. They've earned those lands. When New York City transitions over to the time period of New York under James Stewart, Duke of York, who ran a slave trading business with his older brother, Charles II, who was a monarch, they named the city after him, after a slave trader, before he became king. And there is tension around black freedom, especially because the King of England is head of the church and the state. And so he's deciding that it's easier to be a slave trader if the church agrees that black people don't have souls. And as the head of the church and the state, that kind of decision making is not that challenging to make. And so part of what's happening for black people who are landowners during this time period is they're having increased difficulties maintaining their property. They don't all go away the same day, the same year. As I stated, some hold on to it for decades into the next century. But it's a part of an important story, not just that they had the land, but that they had the land and also fought to hold on to it into the next epoch. And this is the proclamation that was used for the slave trading monopoly by the two brothers, the king and the duke. And so I just want to pause here for a second, because I think it's critical for us as people living right now in New York. We have been through a pandemic. We are still dealing with the repercussions of it. We can look back in history and see that black people were able to gain certain privileges or rights during the early days of New Amsterdam, New Netherlands. We see that in the first decades of New York under the British, that they are primarily interested in creating a slave state and utilizing the territories as a way to enrich themselves in their business, which is basically taxing commodities made by enslaved people. But the question is, what are we doing? You know, if aliens came over right now and just took over the territory and it went from being Lenape to Dutch to British to American to aliens, what are we going to, what's going to be said about us? What did we do? Covered it up? Didn't talk about it? You know what I'm saying? I think it's important for us to stop and understand our role as historic actors, because we're always here. When I say we're always here, there's always people making decisions, doing something or not doing something. And I think if you can look at the 1640s and see that black people were able to earn land during the height of the transatlantic slave trade, then I think we have to ask ourselves, what's the minimum that we can do, and what's also the greatest things that we can do. I think that marking these lands is ambitious, but also it's doable. And I think that it creates a different way for us to consider our time period as historic actors, that we decided to do something and make it a part of our ecosystem versus do what has already happened by our country primarily, which is cover it up. And also under the British time period, which is like not just cover it up, but try to take those lands away from those black people. And so I think that we should enter a time and space where more of us can see ourselves in history, that can be empowered by seeing that we're historic actors, that we're not just passers-by and passively reading about somebody else's narrative, but not quite seeing how that can empower us in our decisions. And that's what I want to, just pivot to now before we begin to wrap up. So this exhibition's up actually right now in the Oculus. It went over well last year. Once again, I credit that to the resolution that your committee passed 2 years ago. And so it's rerunning again. And this is right here in the World Trade Center, and you can walk around and see it. And it's a way for people to see Land of the Blacks, see the artwork, but also ask questions, scan a QR code, and then begin to find out some more information. And some of the new information that we've been able to dig in, and this is research done by our archivist and researcher, Michael Salgalero. This guy named Peter Santomé. He was one of the first Dutch people who was enslaved by the West India Company, and he was able to receive his land grant 1644. As stated here, Santomé suggests he was probably from a Portuguese colony off the coast of West Africa, and his land was initially 6 acres, and you can kind of get a sense of where it is right there at McDougal and Bleecker Street near West Houston, which you can see here on the map. So if you're ever walking in that area, this is the land grant that was given or earned by Peter Santomé. And then going forward, you see that Peter Santomé had 2 sons, Solomon and Lucas. And according to the Phelps book, you can see one was a physician, one was a landholder. And the story continues when you see they also were given additional land by Stuyvesant, the same guy who himself was an enslaver, but came back to New York and advocated for the black people who had land to maintain those lands. And it's close to Bond and Great Jones Street, which is also close to where Manuel Garrett DeRoos had his land. And just for people who are also art nerds, right over here off of Bowery, when you make that left, is also the last place that Jean-Michel Basquiat lived. This is where he actually passed away. And so you have this interesting layering of history between black landowners and even like contemporary art history, considering, you know, the very important relevance of Jean-Michel. But most people who have Jean-Michel movies and books don't quite know that a lot of the places where he, you know, had exhibition and did his tagging were actually places that were black farms centuries prior. So I think that there's still a lot of history to tease out as we continue to explore versus this notion that somehow there's nothing to see here. And because nothing to see here, it's like move on, but we find new information all the time. So here goes where you see even additional land earned in 1680 by Edmund Andros. And we see that's a 30-acre plot. The largest land grant during the Dutch period was actually by Manuel Trumpeter, which was 18 acres. And then here you can see there's a widow, 1714, get some more land from John Horn, 2 later. Wall Street slave market is created. And then in 1712, there is a revolt. And what you see over here is that there is a change of the family location after the 1712 revolt, which happens on Broadway and Maiden Lane, the same location like a block from where Occupy Wall Street was encamped 300 years later, also complaining about the excesses of Wall Street. And so when you think about the history and the research, you also found these connections, like one, like I said, with Jean-Michel, another one with Occupy Wall Street, but a lot of the conversations happening in these spaces all are looking at capitalism or ancestry or history or statements. And for me, it's fascinating that there doesn't seem to be a limit to what you can discover when you open your eyes and you connect the dots. But perhaps we're just creative, but I think that it's just there, you know? And so just beginning to like do a bit of a recap and close it up and have some conversation and some questions is I think that our approach and part of where we want to come back and speak to you as a community board where really we got our start in many respects pushing this work into the public square is putting the pedagogy in the public square. New York City is the biggest and most segregated school district in the country. I'm not saying that to shake my finger. I'm just saying that, yes, we have a Thurgood Marshall Courthouse in Lower Manhattan named after a venerable Supreme Court Justice whose monumental work was the Brown versus Board of Education in Topeka, where he points out that the 14th Amendment isn't being honored with separate but equal. But in the same time, we have a school district that doesn't really like to integrate students that much. Some of that could be about class, some of that could be about parents choosing to move their children away from other students. And that's everybody's right or decision. But I feel like as time moves forward, we have to think about what are other ways to share this information versus trying to always pipe into the classrooms, which can be a very fraught space to try to have some uniform education. I think that by putting the pedagogy in a public square in a place like New York, you create more opportunities for people to learn. And part of that was going to require innovative partnerships. Here we are talking to you, a community board. We also talk to people at the World Trade Center. We're also talking to foundations. We're also talking to real estate developers. Innovative partnerships mean that people who might not normally come together to form a squad to get something done can create all types of new possibilities if we think outside the box or forget there's a box at all. And the classroom, in my opinion, that's most important is the one that we all walk by every day. The classroom called the public square. When you walk down the street, when you go to the park, what information is there? What information is accessible? And that's where we get to the third point, which is using technology, not just to get followers and likes, but a way to scale. That's the main thing with technology. It's a scalable phenomenon. If you're able to use technology, for example, I'm here in the Seaport on my computer, but here we are sharing information. Why? Because of technology. So we can use something that doesn't have a major imprint in the public square, like a flag, but also have that flag represent people whose stories are erased, but then use technology as a way to get a broader way of dialing into that information on your phone or on your computer. We begin to really scale the capacity for us to understand and comprehend new information. And if we can do this in the World Trade Center, I'm sure we can do it at a park. And a few more points. Speaking of being outside, for those who know me, I'm a prodigious walker. I think that part of what's beautiful also about being outside is I dig it, but also there's interesting science that shows you that that's some of the best time to be a creative thinker, which doesn't mean we shouldn't be in schools. I do love schools, but I think that we should also get outside, and outside should be a place of learning as well. When you take your walks and you're in the most vital space to think differently, that's the perfect time to introduce new ideas with engaging, intentional art that also is connected to technology that allows you to get more information than what's present in the very moment. And so I encourage everybody to get outside and take long walks, and also just imagine what it's like to get outside and take long walks and find out new things about history that you might not find out in school. And with that said, I want to shout out my team. As I stated, we were able to receive a grant from the Mellon Foundation. We'll send a press release to Mar and Patricia, give you some more context for that. But our team is expanding with different visual storytellers, program managers, archivists, etc. And so we're just excited to be able to partner with you and be in dialogue with you about ways to take these stories into new directions. And with your blessing, would love to hear what you think about our new ideas, because the next step would be to put it into a format that you can look at and see, what it's going to cost, because we want to find ways to raise the funds for it as well. So this is a conversation. So I think we have a whole 20 minutes at least to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if people want to engage.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions from the committee or the board? No questions? Did we get any registration? Oh, there's a question. Matt?
I thought this was absolutely awesome. So for that was a lot of history that I didn't know, and I feel pretty embarrassed about that because I should know that.
Thank you, Matthew. It's okay. We're
we're all learning day by day.
Kind of go. You gotta learn something, and I think thank you for that.
No, absolutely. So I have a lot of technical questions that I won't bore everybody else with, but I might send you a long email. But I guess the overarching question is, how can we be of help? How what do you guys need?
Yeah, well, I mean, as stated, your continual support is vital. It just so happens that you have an amazing community board that just so happens to be the location where the lion's share of these lands existed. So just appreciate that reality when things sometimes seem like the world's going backwards, we happen to have this very interesting serendipitous opportunity. And so the continual support and engagement is one thing, but if you can keep your ears open for the next step, which is we figured out this is what it's going to cost to put these flags in these locations and work with this tech company or these, NYU students to scale the technology. So that way we're able to build a platform that's online. So it's like the iceberg scenario. You might see a flag, minimal footprint in the public square, a lot of precedent for flags in our city. So to put up some different flags that access new information, that's going to be our pitch. And so as of today, anything that your community board can, maybe write that says that you are interested in our approach, but I think eventually we'll probably need to come back to you with a proposal that might require one more resolution. That could also help us then go to other elected officials. But that said, we were able to receive money from a foundation just off of what we have done thus far. And so it might not even be the kind of thing where we need too many people to support it. It might just be like the right handful that says, this works, this makes sense, they have buy-in from the community. Let's see what's next. Did I answer your question?
It did indeed, and I don't know what is required of flags, but if I hear flags, Janine or someone else tell me, that sounds like another committee may also be weighing in. So doesn't quality of life deal with that?
Actually, I don't think so. We looked into this, and we also talked about placing flags on private property. In which case,
I'm not saying you're in the wrong place, by the way. I'm just yeah.
I know this is the right place. This is
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you, Matthew. Is it
Yeah,
Matt?
thank you.
but yeah, it depends on the location. So
But that goes back to the conversation around partnerships that are innovative, right? It might be NYU, it might be city parks, it might be a private land. It might be a range of things that begin to create this various, like not to put anybody out there, but I find it interesting that Anthony Congo's land is right where the new museum is located. So it's like here you have a well-established, well-heeled museum that is into art and new thoughts. That was really like right there situated where one of the landowners would have been, Anthony Congo. So perhaps the museum is like, we want to do this. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's a way for us to do it in a way that is very New York, so that when the world comes to visit, it's like, only in New York would this be done this way, this well.
yeah, we do. So I believe 25 of the 28 parcels are in CB2. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is really important to CB2 because, as Mr. Ware said, we have the lion's share. I wonder if we need another resolution. I wonder if we might write a letter, and that may be a little more direct, explaining the importance of marking these sites and acquiring funding for these sites and support for these sites. Dr. Smith?
Thank you, Mar. Kamau, I know you were here. What piqued my interest, I've been living here. I came here to go to school at NYU in '68. I'm actually from the South. What's very interesting, though, is that I was lucky enough to be here, and when they were excavating and renewing Washington Square Park. I remember when they found all those bones, and they found out those bones were from slaves. We were very fortunate at the time to have a Black mayor who really put together, and they, of course, that's how we were able to get the African burial ground.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking that maybe now, and maybe Mar and Pat and I might have see if we can have a conversation that we do have a new administration.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be that we could see if there might be some interest to also help in that regard. That's just something that I thought of, but we were just very fortunate, I think, that we had a Black mayor during the time when those bones, I'm not sure what would have happened to those bones if we hadn't. So, just something to think about.
No, that's a great point. I remember now something I forgot during the slides was that Councilman Marte was here for the Vision Day proclamation, and put himself on the spot and says, I think it's important for us to mark these locations in the public square, and he's now, this is his district. So I think that from the new administration, from the council to the mayor to a senator who also backed it up, I think that it's great that there is a number of different layers of support that are there, and so I think that it's the kind of thing where, like, once it's done, it's gonna like, of course it's done, but I think that the work is is there, but I think that it is something that it meets the moment. It meets the moment. I think that there are elected officials and community boards and private sector philanthropists who are in support of this idea. So I'm looking, I'm glad to be back and have good news, and show you how much we're able to accomplish with the momentum that you gave us about 18 months ago.
I see Bob has a question, but first I'd like to say, it's fascinating when Dr. Smith pointed out the graves that were discovered or rediscovered in many of these sites, and the Basquiat link, the house on Great Jones, that Black people seem through history to return to the same places and gather in the same places. And, if we looked for any of these sites, just like Black Vision Day, it's not about one date, it's about one date, but that it repeats in significance year after year for Black people. So I don't know, that's really interesting to me, but if we looked, we could find, several significant events associated with any of these lots that are particular to the Black diaspora here in New York. Bob?
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Ware, for the presentation. Every time I hear you talk, I learn a little bit more. But and in your last comments, you kind of addressed a little bit what I'm about to ask or comment on, which is that, the interest in marking the locations, and you've been talking to elected officials. But as you were talking, it called to my mind, the Freedom Trail in Boston. And it made me think of, how wonderful it would be to have a Land of the Blacks trail, marked with maps and plaques and that kind of thing. And I think, I don't know if that's something that's, I think it is feasible at some point in time, but, talking to, and I know we have at least someone, Nicole Barth from Eric Botch's office. So there's at least one elected official on this at this meeting. But is that a direction where you hope to go or think is feasible?
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, and thank you for your positive remarks about our conversation. I appreciate it. But as a history nerd, I love to travel. For me, it's just like getting on a spaceship. Like I've been to Boston, I've done the Freedom Trail, and I think that it's something I haven't thought about, how it's just different colored bricks. That's all it is. When it comes down to production, they colored bricks a different color. You follow those bricks, and it just takes you through the Revolutionary era, and you go past Franklin's gravesite, not Ben Franklin, but his parents. But it's a simple thing that allows people to move, and in many respects, I think that these flags would be very similar to a Freedom Trail, but instead of it being at your feet, it's above your head and it's flying. And I think that there's a bit of a some subterfuge there, because I think a lot of times we think about flags, we might think about land being taken by force. You know, it's like we put the flag down, you took your land, or now it's our time, here's a flag. I think that what if these flags were an invitation, you know? So I think that having the flags up in a way that would give you a same sense of moving through space, especially if we use technology as a way to have that map visible, and perhaps even working with people like, you know, a Google or an Apple to make sure that when you go to the map, the same way you might have a restaurant, it might tell you, here go like the land of the blacks, and it's actually like something that's situated, you know, and it could be some really awesome, I mean, you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I think about this from an economy standpoint. I envision people coming to, you know, this district to walk this area, and it could be different kind of partnerships with different businesses too, and cultural institutions, so that when you come to the area and you see these land of the blacks, you also are encouraged to engage in other ways too. So I think it could be a win-win year round, and you don't quite know until you start doing it. And some of these connections you don't realize until you begin taking those steps, no pun intended. So thank you for that, because I think that it's been in the middle of my brain all the time. I've been to Boston, I've done the Freedom Trail, very civil production. Perhaps that's been a part of my secret sauce. I just didn't notice it. So yeah, I think that'd be a great direction. Ideally, people can take this walk by themselves. You know, you log on, you see the flags, you go for your walk, get the history, and you can put it into your ears and like listen to it that way as well. Yeah, I just think it could be a classic New York amenity.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Eugene?
Sorry, can you hear me? All right.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say this was a really great presentation. So first, thanks for that. It was a lot of information, and I'm also a history nerd, so it's very interesting to see, you know, what is the history behind, you know, the places we live.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, in terms of outreach or I guess partnering with other parts of New York City, have you worked with New York City and Company, the tourism, you know, basically the tourism board of New York?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
I was kind of looking there, and I was searching kind of on, you know, on their site, and I didn't see any mention of, you know, I tried a couple of different searches, but I didn't find, you know, Black Gotham or the tours.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if there was any, because I like the tourism aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fascinating. I think people come to the city to learn something,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, I think it'd be wonderful for people to come to the hotels or you know, the stores in our neighborhoods and be able to come back with some other information that they didn't know. You know, I think that's always an
Yeah.
interesting part of touring.
No, I love that question, because we do have some things in the works. The flag that I presented that showed the mermaid,
Mhm.
that project was our marketing partner was NYC and Co, and we met them because they actually booked one of these kind of talks for their staff, and they're also, I don't know if it's okay to announce it, but I think it's okay. We were we did a walking tour of City Hall, the first Black History walking tour of City Hall, called Epicenter, and we're doing a series of short films based on our walking tour. We're going to release this summer, and NYC and Co is going to be our the marketing partner for the Public Design Commission, and so it's a work for hire. We don't own it. We're doing it for the city, free. The walking tour is free in the City Hall. The videos are online for free, and so NYC and Co will help push that on their kiosks and on their social media platforms. So we do have a growing connection with them, and I hope to continue to develop it. And I think that when it comes to pushing the Land of the Blacks project, I would count on them to continue to be in our corner. So I'm gonna let them know that you brought them up. Encourage them to keep working together.
And just my second, one other tech comment is, you know, this sounds like the perfect thing for like an app, like an augmented reality app. You know, walk around, be able to see where you are location wise, and then have that history. Like you said, if a lot of this is self-done or self-guided, then you know, I think that would be an amazing kind of thing to have as an app. And you know, you download that and you can walk around and it can tell you, you know, where you are and other spots near where you are. So just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, totally. And you know what? Honestly, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I've seen this happen where you're inspired to do something,
Mhm.
and once you do that thing, two other things that were unintended happen that are positive. It's like, whoa, but that's kind of how the universe plays us all. I think that since black people have been on this island since the 1600s, and the cultural output on the impact of New York City has continued, past the Harlem Renaissance to now. I think that this kind of technology, this kind of architecture of narrative allows for other stories to also be elevated that intersect with Black history, And so I think it's a rising tide, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I think that once you do this right, it creates different types of modalities for other narratives to also get a similar opportunity to get like bumped up and share it in a way that makes all of our frequency just like higher, and that's all I care about right now. I'm just like, I love history, but I'm bored with racism. I'm ready for something different. Can we pick a different problem,
Right.
please? So let's get to the next thing. Hopefully, it's not as bad, but let's evolve as human beings to something more interesting.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to acknowledge some of the stuff in chat. And by the way, I apologize. We asked people to put questions in the Q&A, but I don't think we have a Q&A. So
Technology.
raise your hands, right in the chat, however you like. Tiffany Wimbush, it could be an ideal partnership if the Ronald O. Perlman Performing Arts Center, slated to open in 2023 in Lower Manhattan, could ensure that the story of Black Gotham is ingrained into its ongoing program offerings. It's funny, when we talk about these sites being recognized and this work that we do, and not specific to this, but any Black history work in this city, we try to remember, well, it's important that the work is led by people that look like the people we're talking about. So that is a fabulous idea. We will definitely look into that, but we always want to make sure that the work is being uplifted by Black people, Indigenous people, people who are related to it, spiritually and physically. Ashley, there is so much Black history in Lower Manhattan District 2. We need to respect those landmarks and highlight them to educate our community and beyond. For all the visitors who come here, Black history is American history. Black Gotham Experience has the talent to do this well. And yes, they do. That's so true. When I was posting the flyer this week, I was saying village history is Black history, right? Because the thought of this community that I live in here in the West Village is not that. So it's great to remind people and let them know that village history, the first village history, is in fact Black history, not to ignore the Lenape. But Akila.
Thank you so much. This has been incredible. These are my favorite meetings. Also because, I'm born and raised here. And I was actually born and raised in a majority Black jazz world that was here. That was my upbringing. So, but I was wondering if there's information, or I'm curious about, how groups of people kind of like moved and relocated to different parts of the city, and you can kind of see the like movement patterns of Black communities, like when they were, here in the land of the Blacks, and then like what kind of communities grew out of that. Is there information on like, what kind of communities grew out of that? Where did they move to in the city? Because I would imagine they're being pushed further and further out. And sort of like, what are connections, like if we continue to follow the timeline, where are Black people then moving through the city, and like, I wonder if there's any information on that, or a place or resource to find that.
Yes. This is unfortunately a plug moment, friends. We've been commissioned by the Apollo Theater to reimagine what the Harlem Renaissance means now. And it was initially going to premiere in 2020 as like a centennial from 1920. And the first series of walking tours are April 23rd, there's going to be 3 of them. And the name of the project is called Kuzaliwa, which is Swahili for birth. And part of our framing of it is it a renaissance, or is it part of an ongoing birth process, right?
Right.
What you see in Harlem is that New York is so good at rebranding. I mean, the best rebranded project ever is how New York has somehow washed its hands of slavery and racism and put it all on the South. I mean, I understand why people in the South get mad at New York, but the Great Migration was mirrored with a Manhattan migration, where Black people who were in Lower Manhattan are forced north, and that's in part how we have this this new Negro moment, where you have this intersection of people escaping like the horrors of like Red Summer, 1919, Birth of a Nation, people coming back from World War I, wearing their soldiers' uniforms with their head up high, getting lynched for being proud Black soldiers and veterans, right? And so what's happening in the South is pushing Black people up north, but people who are in Manhattan are also having to escape white mob violence on the island of Manhattan. But we know about the South, but not quite the violence in New York. And so the migration pattern is clear. It's northward and it's out. You leave the city altogether. Many went to Brooklyn, or you just go from Lower Manhattan to the Village to the Tenderloin, and then eventually the last place that people are able to reside and I guess kind of have a stand is in Harlem. And ironically, some people consider the end of the Harlem Renaissance 1935 after another race riot with the police and a Black boy being killed. So you basically have this this history that sometimes can be very uncomfortable to like swallow, but Black milestones culturally and Black migration is often indirectly connected to white mob violence on this island.
Where can we get tickets to that walking tour in April? Or
It's on the Apollo's website. I don't have the link. Maybe Justine can find it. No pressure. But the Apollo, I don't know if we could do that, if that's illegal to post tickets in the chat for community board. I don't know. But it's on the Apollo's website. And it's the first taste of it. But it's an ongoing project. It's called, Kuzaliwa.
Yes, Justine, please share if you can find it. I'm going to take a question from board member Ed Ma. Hi, Ed. Do you have a question? Ed, are you with us? We'll come back to Ed. Dr. Smith?
I just want to just say one quick thing to Mar. I think and to your point about who should be leading the effort, definitely should be people who look like us. And it reminded me of an African proverb that says, if the lion lets the hunter tell the story, it will always be the hunter's version.
May I add something to this? Because this is something I actually could talk about for 60 minutes with more slides. Here's what I think would be worth considering for anybody, whoever wants to help any group that they're not intimately a part of. Find out who's doing that work. And if the people who are doing that work are connected to that story, help them. But what happens a lot because of the legacies of racism and white supremacism in this country, that some people can decide on a Tuesday that they want to help on Wednesday, and by Thursday they've done it. Where people have been trying to get on the stage to not just do the work, but like it's more healing. I think that people don't understand that. I think people think about it just from the standpoint of I want to do it. It's gonna help my organization, and I'll feel better. But is it a healing aspect to the work? Because a lot of this is not just about just doing things. It's about is it a process for the descendant community or the connected community to heal from the work, and that for me is what reparations is all about. For me, the root word is repair. I don't need anybody to cut me a check. I will find a way to make my own money, but don't get in the way of me healing by trying to do something that I need to do with a certain degree of reverence, because it's deeply connected to who I am versus just doing it because you can. So yeah, I could go on, but I see a lot of that these days, and I'm tired of correcting people.
Trisha?
Thank you, Kamau, for coming again and telling the stories of our forgotten history and community work too. It's appalling to see that there are so few public spaces that acknowledge slavery or our own history. I know that communities of colors have had to carry around the knowledge and stories in their bodies because there are no resources devoted to preserving these spaces, and they have, without government support. I know that we have a new mayor. We need to get you and your story in front of him, as well as our new council member, Eric Butcher. I see that Nicole is here as an attendee. And also we have a new Manhattan Borough president, Levine. So we need to get your story and all what you're doing in front of these people, because it's a new administration. So I think that's what we can do for you by hearing what you're presenting here tonight. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Very welcome, honored to, and yes, I'm down. It's I don't know how. I hope everybody is doing well out there. I know Omicron probably had half of this call in the bed in December and January, but I think that there's looking like we'll be able to be outside a little bit more, and our walking tours will be in effect. We're excited to have Justine on deck and have our first full year of season since 2019. And that's going to create a lot more opportunities for us to engage with communities, because we've been doing so much of this virtually. It feels natural now, and it still feels good. But I'm looking forward to being able to be outside, hopefully with as many of you as possible. Happy to do a CB2 walking tour. And so set it up, Mar and Patricia. I'll show up. I'll bring the nerd gang. Happy to give you all a walking tour and others. And move this conversation going forward.
Yeah, so we do have a board walking tour that we are putting together. It's going to happen soon for those that are on the board. For those who are attendees, the BGX link is in there. Schedule a tour. Matt?
You mentioned set it up. If we want, how do we set it up? What do we do in order
we're setting
to?
it up. We're in
No. I'm
process.
sorry. I'm sorry, Mark. Outside of CB2, if we want to, so I help run an internship program for my work. I think this would be a perfect match for us for a number of reasons. How would I or anybody else in my situation get in touch with you to organize a walk?
I'm putting our email and the chat.
Awesome.
That'll go to me or Justine, our program manager, and from there we can set it up.
Awesome.
And like I said, elementary school all the way up. And I think the reason why it connects with such a range of different cognitive levels is because we encourage play. It's a serious topic, but when you tell somebody that the public square isn't going to support you, if you look around, you're not going to see the history. And so because of that, you're going to have to imagine. And here goes a character. Their name is Catalina. Imagine this, empathize. And for kids, that's how they learn anyway. And if they're not learning, that's what they're doing. And so I think that you know, at the end of the day, you know, our humanity makes us all children, you know. And so I think that whatever age group you're working with, we found success from second grade to, like, you know, senior citizens, because we invite people to play and see what's not presented. So yeah, you got the email address. Happy to hear from you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a question from Pete Davies. Pete? Pete? We're losing everybody. Pete? Nope. All right, we'll go back to Pete. Ed?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Pete, will you wait one more moment? We found Ed. Ed, are you ready to speak?
Yes, I like to mention to the speaker if he has ever connection with the burial ground at the Federal Plaza, because when I was working at the Human Rights Commission, I know that David Dinkins went to the Secretary of Interior overnight to when the developer want to build a federal building, they found the bones, the black bones, and David Dinkins went to the Interior Secretary overnight to appeal for museum for preservation. That's why I don't think I know that time I close with David Dinkins, so I know this. I wonder whether the speaker knows any connection. If you want to develop your mission, whether you have connection with the burial ground, maybe they have more information, more valuable things you can play on.
No, thank you for that comment and suggestion. We do have a connection with the architect, Rodney Leone. We've been in contact with Dr. Blakey, the archaeologist, Mr. Dodson, who's also in charge of the Schomburg during that time period. And we have a walking tour called As Above, So Below that is about the African burial ground. And it's right behind City Hall. So part of
yes
is connect the programs at City Hall and African burial ground and put those together so people can get walking tours in those spaces, because they're
right
footprint. So we've you know, I.O. Harrington as well. You know, we've been talking to people who are community leaders, activists, and for us, you know, scaling might take a little bit more time because, like, you know, we're not like a huge nonprofit or a huge business, but we do put a lot of intention into the work that we're doing, and we're at a place where, as we come out of the pandemic, we can scale better. But being able to reach people and talk to people like yourself and connect those dots has been very useful. And so I can tell you that we do have contacts at the African Burial Ground, and look forward to continuing to grow them because all of these dots are connected, you know, and it tells a very large, epic story. You know, it's like
yes. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Question, Ed. Pete, you're on.
Great, thank you. Really fascinating information and presentation. Thank you for that. I'm just curious, in the archives of New York, I don't know do the records still exist for the land transactions, or is most of the information you find based on the mapping that's been done over the years?
The land transactions are in the Stokes book, and also Callahan has some of those records as well. And so if you're in Albany, you can go to the New Netherland Institute and get some of the state records, which then would have been New Netherland. And the city records are in the municipal building on Chambers Street across from the Boss Street Courthouse. And also, if you have people that might have the different iconography and like the printed volume, they might be in some of the libraries as reference, but not circulation. You can actually go through and see some of the land grant transactions, because after Stuyvesant lost the territory, people under Nichols, who was the governor for a while under the Stuarts, also began to appraise and go through and determine who owned what land. And so those transactions are there as well. But then the slate gets wiped clean after the revolution, where people like Delancey who owned land lost it at gunpoint because he was a loyalist. But we still have Delancey Street to like kind of give us an idea where he was. And so New York, Manhattan in particular, is a very fascinating document where you have these layers, but then also like these jumps where things change from one hand to the next. But I don't feel like I'm missing as much because there's a lot there. I appreciate being able to have all those different layers of like Dutch history, British history, and US history, and find those all like in the same psychic location. So the answer to your question is those land grants and transactions are present, but you can't find all of them, but you can get a sense of where certain things took place.
Just a quick follow-up. When the laws were put in place in the early 1700s for no Black ownership and no, you couldn't pass it on, you know what happened to the land at that point? Were folks forced to sell, or do you know what happened in those situations?
Well, it's not always the same scenario, and there were some people who held onto land after those black codes were passed, and so even though the idea was not that all black land ownership would end, but that black land ownership could not be passed on from landowner to heir, as an HEIR heir, and so it began to dissipate. But there's been some degree of black land ownership all the way up to the revolution. And then after, we have this new republic, there are still black landowners as well. And so it's been like more of like a staccato drum beat, and it kind of fades off to one measure at a time. But there's been a consistent drum beat of black land ownership in this area since the 1640s of some degree or another. It just hasn't been an increase in volume. And also, ironically, I'll tell you something that often feels weird to say, but it's true, is when the Howe brothers came here to lead the war effort against the Continental Army under George Washington, that was actually the first Great Migration, because black people that were enslaved in the South were told, if you leave your masters and come fight for Lord Dunmore in Virginia or fight for the British, you'll be free. And so for the first time in over 100 years, black freedom actually grew under the British during the Revolutionary War. And after the war was over and we became an independent country, black freedom shrank. So we actually had more land. I mean, there was actually bizarrely a spike in black presence in New York City during the Revolutionary era.
Crazy. Katie?
I just thank you for your presentation. And there are so many references in the chat. I can't gather them. Could someone can someone gather the things in the chat so we could have like a little
Yes, we will
sheet?
aggregate and share.
That'd be so helpful because I can't keep up with all the good ideas here,
the chat, yeah.
different books. So I would love to have it in one place. Thank you.
You can also save it if you want. You just scroll over that little hamburger and hit save chat. It's like there's like 3 dots side by side. Click it and hit save chat.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Got it?
But I think I'll save it for myself, but I hope that maybe we can collect it all more as a committee and then have it available as a resource, particularly, for people who might not have been able to attend.
That's what's up. Shout out to the team.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me about the 3 dots, Kamau. Always something to learn on Zoom.
Thank you, Isa and Justine, for lighting up the chat.
Akila, I see you said that it would be great if our committee could publish a reading list. Yes, it would. And it has, but it will again. You're right. It's been about a year. We should definitely revisit that.
Something else that should be in the chat. We're doing a talk tomorrow for village preservation about the riots 1863. So yeah, village preservation, they'll have all that information.
Drop the link, someone, so people can sign up.
Yeah. Village preservation, Fighting Dark, tomorrow, 6 p.m. But yeah, I think that's being worked on right now.
Wonderful. Oh, We have a question. Katie, are you done? Yes. We have a question from Michael Markowitz, public member.
Hi, sound check.
Crispy.
Crispy. Oh, that's what I like to hear. Another Rice Krispie fan. Pardon the old picture. My hair is longer and grayer. So long story short, somebody mentioned a couple of minutes ago the African Burial Ground National Monument down near the Federal Building. I'm a civil engineer. I manage a lot of projects in town. And one of my recent projects led me to learn just from the displays at the center that the information center there, that the actual burial ground is much bigger geographically than the memorial. And that really knocked me for a loop. I'm just speechless. It was really sobering because without going into the details of my client, one of my projects was inside the boundaries of the original burial ground. So if that project ever gets off the ground, which includes some underground work, I'll be doing everything I can to engage with cultural historians and archaeologists and so forth. And what I'm getting to is that should be somehow codified into whatever projects the city or the state do in that part of town, and not just dependent on me having my heart in the right place and doing what I can as a project manager on just one address.
Yeah. Michael, something I want to just add with your comments for the group is when I say we're historic actors and we have to consider what we're doing, it's one thing to have hindsight and critique or analyze what the Dutch did, or critique and analyze what happened during the British period. This is our republic. This is our city. This is our state. And what we do should reflect where we are. But right now, the African burial ground was initiated during the time of New Netherland. During the British time period of New York City, the African burial ground continued. But it wasn't until the early Republic of the United States did we actually have a very intentional disruption of the African burial ground, in part by the building of things like City Hall and like the Boss Street Courthouse. They knew they were disrespecting the African burial ground. And they also knew that people were actually, that there were actual slave traders leaving out of this harbor up until the Civil War. So I just think that we have to look at that and analyze, these massacres, this racism, this suppression, this erasure, and shame on us if we do nothing. We have to do a lot more than we are, but I think that it has to be a communal effort, and that way I think that we can make scalable change. But when discussing the African burial ground, it's worth noting that our country disrespected it, and more than any other nation that was here prior.
If I may just add one thing, thank you for that. And again, it's so sobering to hear and learn more about. I fear that too many people look at that monument and think, well, there's a monument to it. We're done. But the excavation work and the underground work continue on a kind of as needed basis, because most of that area is built out. But that's not to say there isn't more that could be done, or God forbid, more families' heritage remains to be found.
That, and also it's a site for ongoing cultural engagement. So I think that part of what, one of the ways that, I was able to meet your colleagues on the community board is through engagement. And so I think that that's part of what's necessary, is to connect dots and continue the conversation. So so thank you for your comments. I know we kind of had a little nerd out, but
Yep, sure. Thank you very much.
You got it.
And to Michael's point, yes, there should be something where would that go in the city charter specific to Lower Manhattan? But it should be for all, the entire island. I mean, if these sites are found or more of them are found, or we know where some of them are, it should be in there. Maybe this is something we talked to the Charter Commission about. We actually had them a few months ago. I think that's a great idea. And maybe that's something we can also advocate for in whatever letter or resolution we write. Maybe that's a resolution. That might be a resolution in and of itself, in my opinion. We have a question from Darlene Lutz. And this will be the last question.
Oh, thank you, Mar. Terrific presentation, golly.
Thank you.
Always want to learn more about where we all live. I'm going to ask a question that may seem a little weird because it's about what is going on contemporary wise on the TV. There's a series on right now called The Gilded Age.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been, I've been reading a lot of the discussion about, the Black woman who was brought in at the very end of sort of fleshing out the story. And I guess where I'm trying to go with this is that, there's been a lot of discussion. She's from a family in Brooklyn, they're established, they're, by all standards, how they're shown, a music teacher, a pharmacist's father, she's a writer, there's a Black newspaper, all of that in context that this has brought this story, people are interested in this story. More than they are in, what's going on in the actual Gilded Age on Fifth Avenue. And, people are asking, is this historically correct? Was there a Black community in Brooklyn and in this period? And I think, I don't want to make this sound too weird, but like Sex and the City sort of brought all this tourism to, all these identifiable areas, that people still ride buses around to go see. It would seem that in the contemporary culture that's going on right now with, sort of people really curious, they're curious about it. It's brought it into the conversation. And it seems like something could be tied in there to, bring it, use that as a sort of platform for touring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Last week we did a walking tour right through Washington Square Park, other side of Wall Street, caught a train, and then brought them down by City Hall, hit that stop, then came to our studio, and then had another talk. Then they had lunch. And it was a group of Fulbright scholars that comes to Black Gotham annually. Not to say that we're already doing it, but part of once again, we had to cut back a bit because of the pandemic, but we do have enough tours. We have a space to begin to put together larger packages of experiences to understand New York. And, we are a small studio. And so we want to do the graphic novels, the TV series. We want to do all those kind of things in sequence that makes sense for us and doesn't minimize our quality. But I think that there's nothing wrong at all about utilizing these fantastic stories and scaling them in ways that can be on platforms like HBO or like a Netflix. We're not against that at all. That's part of our goal, because we're storytellers, we're artists, and I think that there's a way to have meaningful engagement, but also scale it in ways that make sense and are also entertaining. And I don't think that what you're saying is weird at all. I think that it'd be weird not to do it. It just has to be done in a way that honors the people's lives and honors the history. And when I watch certain documentary series and they start going left with the facts, it's like, bro, why are you lying? Like, there's enough real history here to make a compelling story. You don't got to make things up. And so we can do things where we can like have a nice drumbeat of important facts that people can actually come to the city and experience, but also have media that matches it. And yeah, so my answer to your question is, well, comment / suggestion, not quite question, is that makes sense. And I'll tell you one thing that's kind of funny. There's a school called City School for the Arts on Broadway, and we talk to their middle school students every year with one of our walking tours. Thus far, it's been Sarah's Fire about the 1712 rebellion, but we did the one for 1741 recently. And one of the middle school students told the teacher, like, she goes, I'm writing a screenplay because this stuff writes itself. And so I thought it was cool that a middle school student, going back to, I was inspired by that cohort, is seeing these stories as something that makes them want to write and create more narratives and make more art. And we plan on, putting our hat in the ring in a not too far away to add to the mix of media that helps people better understand this time period without watering it down and making it corny. It's going to be real.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And if you have $5 million, Darlene, call me tomorrow.
I wish.
No, I'm just saying, even if I had all the money tomorrow, I wouldn't get started the next day. I would spend some time, still studying and researching. We're not in a rush because we know that the quality is key. So yeah, but we're on our way, and I think that what you're saying makes sense. It's not weird.
I just see a lot of people coming, I foresee that, tourism is going to explode sooner than later back again. And, this seems like a primed opportunity that people are coming to the city and, it would be a new experience, and it's gotten some exposure already. So, people are interested, not to put any pressure on you, like get your bus tour ready, by April. But the young people they're interested in history. If it's, presented in in a way that they can relate to it, and certainly having a TV show on right now where people are going, oh, I didn't know that, because apparently, even though Julian Fellows is not an American and is a male, he apparently, it's fairly true to fact, or true to form and fact of representation, which, stunned a lot of people. I mean, this is before, how long did it take to get to Brooklyn from Manhattan? 2 days or something, I don't know, but it's
you can walk to Brooklyn, darling.
There were no bridges, Mar.
No. Well,
Good days there were.
They had bridges by then.
No, she had to travel by ferry. That's why she ended up.
I think Dr. Smith has the last question.
Yes, she does.
Good question. This has been great. Of course, it's, and I thank you, Mar, for allowing me, but I have to respond to the last comment that was just made. I think we have to also be realistic and understand what is happening contemporarily in our country with people who want to erase the history of what has happened out of their own guilt, and with the critical race theory, the banning of books in school, like the old days of burning books. So we have to be very careful. Maybe the people who are tourists might be interested, and hopefully they will. But we have to remember is that the history between Black Americans is intricately woven with American history. And what we cannot forget is that people who are and are wealthy now or have been fortunate enough to have wealth based on the slavery of people for years and years and years. It is something that we have to really be very careful not to allow it to be this history to be ignored or to be to not make it present. So I'm glad you are doing this, Mr. Ware, because if we don't know where we've been, we definitely are not going to know where we're going. And there is in this country right now a concerted effort to really cover up this story or make it go away. So I think that it's important for our young people and for generations to come to really make sure that this does not happen. And I'm very pleased that this committee had this, and you keep doing that work, and I'm going to think of ways to really assist you. Okay?
I appreciate it. That sounds like a good last word to me. I can't top that.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Smith. And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ware, and the BGX team. Yeah, we were lucky enough to be able to support this work back in 2020. I put the resolution in the chat for anybody that wants to see it. It's in there, and maybe we'll post it again, Patricia, if you can find it. So I'm thinking the best way right now that we can uplift this work and continue our push to get this land acknowledged and marked appropriately, I'm thinking a letter. In order to discuss that, we are going to have to go into business session and bid you adieu. But if you have no objection to that, or is there's any other way we can help support, let us know.
Peace, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Pleasure.
So we are now going to go into business session. Oh, everybody disappeared themselves. Great. So in business session, you attendees are welcome to listen and observe, but will not be able to participate. We will not be taking questions from the chat or comments or elevating anybody at this point. So thank you, everybody who attended. All right. Who wants to go first? What do we think? A letter, a resolution? Katie?
What is the content? Just to be clear, what are we thinking that we want to recommend at this point?
I mean, I'm thinking that we want to refer to the original resolution A. B, talk about the importance of these sites and the work that's been done around them in the past 2 years, what is it, 18 months? And I don't know, maybe we want to get specific. Maybe we want to pick out 1 or 2 sites and say, and here's where we want to start. So we support the markings, but we support the funding. So 2 of these have already been submitted for participatory budgeting. So it's already in there. So that is also something we could uplift to the electeds in the districts that's targeted to.
I think that's very important, because if they don't win in participatory budgeting, then they can be higher on the radar, because sometimes things don't get the nod from participatory budgeting. But if enough people have supported, there's another path to funding. So I think that'd be a great underlining. You know what I mean?
Yep. So yeah, we can put all of that in there. Is there anything that you think should be in a letter? I mean, I think it should be a letter. What do you think?
I think it should be something that's effective. And why do you think letter, not resolution more? Just to get your
Well, so I'm thinking that we already have a resolution A. B, I think now we're at the point where we're talking directly to the decision makers. So a letter feels like a better way to say, hi, here's what we did, here's what we're doing, here's what's coming up, and here's what we need from you in a friendly and concise way. You know, and if they're interested, if they bite, then we can get into the weeds with it, put them together with BGX and whatever other committees of ours might be involved. Who's next? Akila?
Thank you.
I think Matt had his hand up like a long time before me. So can I just give it to him and then he could?
No, he won't let you. 'Cause he's a
I yield
gentleman.
my time, Akil, all yours. I'll go second.
I knew.
Okay.
He's so
So I guess I didn't catch this earlier, but it sounds like they're going to need funding. So what are the, I don't know how the city organizes, but where are the pots of funding for this historical, like who owns it? And I think we should write a letter to the people who control that funding stream.
So, like I said, District 1 and District 3 both currently have participatory budgeting submissions for the recognition of these land grant sites. So it's in there already, and the threshold for those is a minimum of 50K. So it's already in there. So of course we would talk to, councilperson for District 1 and councilperson for District 2, but like, who was it saying? Dr. Smith was saying, do we also appeal to the mayor and city hall?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. And, and this is already on some of our electeds' radars, like Deborah Glick knows about this. So, I mean, we reach out to everybody and we say, I say we cast a wide net. Maybe it's a different letter to the mayor. I don't know.
I think I would like to see the mayor's office get involved also with funding, and especially since so many of our public buildings reside on lands that are in this space. I feel like the city, beyond our local districts, but the city should put some dollars to this as well, and maybe we can help that effort.
Yeah, I mean, City Hall itself.
Exactly.
When they found a African burial ground, a slave burial ground, and no, I'm going to say African burial ground, and when they were, I'm mixing up my stories, but it might have even been when they were building City Hall. They were building something. And they found a bunch of bodies and they hid them. They actually moved the bodies and hid them inside Tweed Courthouse so that they could continue construction without telling anybody. So yeah, maybe we include that history for Mayor Adams, right beneath your feet, buddy. Yeah. Matt?
I'm going to yield my time again. Give me 1 second to Katie, if that's all right. Sorry.
Thank you, Matt. I think we should call this hiding in plain sight, maybe, because the African burial ground was always on the maps. If you look at maps from years and centuries ago, it was always mapped and people knew where it was, but they just were bulldozing over it. I mean, I'm sure that all of Chambers Street, the north side of Chambers Street, between, you know, where the Surrogates Court and 60 Chambers Street is, that's all part of it. So it's all there, but it's hiding in plain sight, which is disturbing. But I wanted to go, you know, the borough president also is involved in some of this funding, and you can get some smaller cultural affairs grants from them. But, you know, this is important to bring to the attention of the borough president. So that's why the letter is great in many ways, because it does, we can hit everybody. And, you know, a resolution is good too, but the letter could, you know, can go to Deborah Glick and Brad Hoylman. I think, you know, make all levels. Jerry Nadler obviously has to be involved, because you know, some of it is some federal land that we've been talking about, not in our community district, but in general, you know, the African burial ground. So I'm happy with the idea of a letter.
Thank you, Matt.
Do you think Matt can go now yet?
Is Matt ready?
I'm finally ready. I'm so sorry. Can we do a reso? I'm sorry, Mar. Mostly because I think we're going to be saying more than what was in the original reso, and I get a lot more comfortable when 25 of my friends agree with me.
Carter?
You know, I was going to say that, sorry, I'm moving around. I'm not on video. I was going to say something similar to Matt, but for a different reason, that the bringing the weight of the board and a past resolution forward, and then with a letter with the reso attached and having a detailed letter, I think really shows the commitment of our board to what we would be saying in the letter. And if anything has to do with funding, I think it's important that the board has an official position on that, because when you start writing letters and asking for funding, it gets a little awkward, because then we would have to do that for other things, and that's not a very good position for the board to be in. And I think that you know, a resolution is also good, because we can mark the success of supporting this, you know, Black Gotham from the beginning, sort of update our position on that, mark the transition. And that doesn't necessarily have to go into the letter, which can be very succinct to each of the different, you know, whoever you guys decide that a letter should be written to. And you can use the resolution going forward if you come up with, you know, other people that letters should be written to in the future.
I was mad at Matt for saying that we had to write a resolution, mostly because, you know, I didn't feel like it. But you're both right. And Carter, that's really smart, because we can, yes, you're both right. Okay, so it's a resolution and a letter. And maybe a separate letter for Adam, since he is being introduced to the topic. Our local electeds, like Senator Hoylman, Assemblymember Glick, Council members Marte, Rivera, and Botcher, all know about this already. So, yeah,
I'd like to, also maybe request a meeting with the mayor. I don't know if he knows anything about this history. You know, maybe we could have a meeting with a selected few, like people who haven't heard this story. You can invite, you know, our guest who can kind of do this kind of walkthrough, because I feel like Eric Adams really really absorbs things through meetings and through that kind of presentation format. And I just say that based on like previous work that I've done, but I would think that it would be of great interest And maybe we can even facilitate that as a board.
Yeah, so we have a planned walk for our electeds and our board coming up soon. So, and yes, he was already on the list. So, you know, that's what we're doing now. We're trying to get buy-in from the decision makers. That's the goal. That's where we're at 2 years later. So yeah, the reso, the letter, the in-person walk, all of those pieces.
Or maybe a Zoom meeting if he can't do the whole walk thing. I don't know.
Or he can send a rep. I mean, but maybe he'll want to come. We'll see. We'll work it out. We'll work it out. We'll get it right in front of him. Any more comments? Who's writing the letter and the reso? Not all at once. We'll get it done and we'll share it. Okay.
Yep.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank
Great
you for
meeting.
great presentation. Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, and
Thanks.
Nicole,
Bye.
thanks.